Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a very special edition of Legitimate Cybersecurity Podcast,
I've
where
missed NPR, Dustin.
Dustin is going to talk a lot more than he usually does. I think that probably actually now we just heard a bunch of people proverbially tuning out because
That's what we want to do to our numbers. We want to make sure that they don't come back. Exactly. If you're
That's
listening,
how you run a successful anything.
Yeah, if you're listening or watching, please, be forewarned. So,
and with that,
yeah, I like the Paris hat. I should have worn one too. Here,
I know. Yes, there you go.
Hypnotoad.
Yep.
Now they have to. Now they can't leave. It's Hypnotoad.
That's right. Dustin and Frank, just trucking it.
Just trucking it with Dustin and Frank.
My Paris hat I actually got in Metropolitan Orlando. So.
Oh yes, the Paris of Florida.
Where you would think you would get it, I've been actually waiting. Actually, I kind of do wear this hat because I want people to be like, "Where'd you get that hat?" Or just assume I got in Paris. Like, "Oh, have you been to Paris?" No.
I want you to know I made no assumptions. But you also have been to Paris.
I have been to Paris. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't really work that well. Okay, if you haven't tuned out, welcome back, everybody, to Legitimate Cybersecurity Podcast, the podcast where Frank and I talk about everything cybersecurity, and then also some things not, like where we got our hats.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us today. I'm pretty stoked about what we have to talk about. This is somewhat I think it's has always been in the zeitgeist as far as like cybersecurity goes. But as of late, there's been some interesting developments, specifically in the legal world, as far as this topic goes. And the topic is cyber maturity, something that Frank Downs is incredibly familiar with, something that I am kind of familiar with.
Something I've spent way too much time with.
Yeah.
Everything I've learned about cyber maturity has been against my own will.
I
was supposed to be a pen tester.
And I'm sure we'll get into this, but it's something that is objective. In some cases, it's a very interesting thing, and again, I'm sure we'll get into it. But on that kind of note, Frank, as far as I know you do a lot of cyber maturity assessments. What does that mean in practical terms for organizations today? So if I say cyber maturity, or an organization wants a cyber maturity assessment, what does that practically mean?
You bring up a really good point, because the topic of maturity when it comes to cybersecurity is just like the topic of maturity when it comes to people. It's all subjective, right? What it means for an organization from, I'd say, the most shared perspective right now is when we talk about cyber maturity, it is the readiness for an incident, combined with the strength of an organization to withstand an incident, prevent an incident, protect themselves from an incident. It's where, the NIST CSF domains come into play, basically. You've got your ability to identify your assets, protect your assets, detect an incident, right? Respond to an incident and recover from an incident. And because we just had to pull it out. What's our governance policy look like? It's the capability to take all of those different aspects and prepare yourself for an incident before it ever happens, and respond well when it does happen. When we talk about maturity as far as moving forward we talked about the subjective element of it as to how you measure it. There's a lot of different ways to measure it. There's a lot of different frameworks that come into play, everything from the NIST cybersecurity framework to ISO, ISO 27001. And then you even have made up frameworks that a lot of companies go around using as well. So there is a lot of, I'd say, play within the topic and within the actual application and the lenses of cyber maturity and even the definition. But long story short, or short story long, it's the readiness for an incident, the preparedness of an organization. And the more prepared you are, the more mature you are.
Yeah, and you fixed my flub. I think I said objective earlier. You're right. It's subjective. For some
reason, I thought you said subjective. That's how tuned out or tuned in.
Okay, well, good. I didn't say that.
Or coded I am, right?
Oh God. Oh my goodness. As far as maturity goes, like, do you think? And this is something that I've noticed in the industry, and something that we've noticed even internally, is the subjectivity of maturity. And we talk about NIST CSF, and we talk about ISO
Yeah.
27001. One of those is a framework, one of those is a standard, really, for a certification that you can get. And there's even ambiguity in that too, right? Where it's what do I use this for? How can I use this? As far as NIST goes, I know that it's not built-in maturity, but
Right.
you see it being like a really kind of good starting place for measurement, maybe not measurement of cybersecurity, but just like a good place to start if you don't know where to start.
It is a good place to start. And I will say there are the NIST CSF tiers now too for how implemented something is, right? Whether
Right.
it's not implemented. I think they have not implemented, partially implemented, fully implemented, and there's another implemented somewhere in there. There's 4 different tiers that they've presented. And it's not a requisite that you use these tiers either. It is a good place to start. But I also think, and I'm interested in your perspective here as well, it all depends on the type of organization. It all depends on their daily operations, right? For example, even though it's also not a maturity framework, but you hear about it a lot when you're talking about maturity, you have the Center for Internet, Internet Studies or Security. What's CIS? Yeah, right. Yeah. I work with it every day, every single day, right? The CIS.
It's like NIST CSF. Sometimes I don't know. I'm like, wait, what does NIST
the CIS framework. And it has implementation groups, and that's a bit more pragmatic for organizations that want to have a, more of a user guide, a manual of how to improve themselves and how to become more secure. So when you have a company that, is new to cyber, maybe they want to use something like that, compared to CSF, which can be a bit more gray, or anything like 853 that is very, very arguably too flexible with the myriad controls that they have. But I also know that you're working with a lot of these as well in your current doctoral studies. So I'm very interested in your perspective. If you are trying to identify a framework or a standard or basically any tool set to start, gauging maturity and readiness, what do you think is the best tool? And do you think it's consistent across all different companies?
Oh man, what do I think is the best tool? I don't know.
Oh, what's your favorite? Tell me your favorite.
Oh, I think
Mine's
NIST
CSF.
CSF. I think NIST CSF is definitely the plurality of the data that I've collected is mostly NIST CSF users, and that's interesting in itself. That it's not necessarily the only thing they use, but it is like one of those things. And most folks use it for gap analysis and that kind of usage to make sure that we're not missing anything, right? We're pretty sure we're squared away. But what are we not paying attention to? I think it's always good to have like a checklist in general, right? For anything. So a framework. So the difference between frameworks and standards is just so out there. And then you throw in certifications and forget it. Like it's just it's so confusing. Like I think I have to explain this at least once a month to somebody that like you can't fail a SOC 2 audit.
Right.
You can do very, very poorly on a SOC 2 audit to the point of where your SOC 2 type 2 deliverable is not something you want to share with other vendors. And so in that sense, sure, you failed because you have to redo some things and go and redo an audit, right? But and then of course a standard is usually tied to something that you kind of have to do, right? So you mentioned 853, 800-171, but also you don't have to use those. It doesn't have to be a standard because you can use 853 and 800-171 and not have to get the certification. You can kind of use it as a framework, right? To check on things. And therein lies some more, creativity, I guess might be the way to put it. Where, like you mentioned earlier, where people have, CISOs, CIOs, directors, VPs will take from a bunch of different areas and be like, well, this will fit here, and this will fit here, and here's what we're going to do here. And that makes sense, right? Because NIST CSF is like, do SDLC. Okay.
Which, let's be honest, you should.
Yeah,
you should.
Sure.
We highly recommend it.
But why? Okay, so what's the framework for SDLC, right? Exactly. And then there's several frameworks. A Microsoft framework for it that's great. There's a couple of other frameworks out there that are great. So then you plug that into that spot, and now you have nested frameworks, nested standards, nested regulations, all that kind of stuff. So what I see used the most, I think, is NIST CSF, and I think because it's a really good baseline. Like here's where we're going to start. If we need to drill down from here, we can. again, the confusion even amongst professionals on what's a standard versus a framework versus a certification versus an
Oh my gosh,
attestation
all the time.
is all the time. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say everybody should get, like, I kind of confuse it sometimes too. I'm like, oh, don't fail your SOC 2 audit. I'm like, no, you can't do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, you can, but you're not going to get an F. Right? You know,
Yeah,
it's not going to
but
be
at the end of the
something.
day, the accountant might not attest happily,
You
right?
know, yeah, I was going to say, like, I'm going to say this, and then ISACA and AICPA members are going to use their accountant powers to cancel me.
All four that listen.
That's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't. I don't know which ones. It's hard to say which one's best. Again, it's like when you, on a daily basis, we're jumping in and we're doing pen tests, or we're doing, vulnerability analysis, or vulnerability setup for organizations. Every organization is different, and you see this when you do your cyber maturity assessments too.
All the time.
Every organization is different, and therein lies kind of another question: is like maturity in general, right? There's maturity of processes, there's maturity of functions within a cybersecurity program, but not all organizations have to be a 5 out of 5, right? They
Oh,
don't all have to be like the most mature they can in every single thing. In
right.
something, sure, but like if you don't have the budget, or it's, you got to do some a little bit of risk analysis. Like, I'd like to get your take on that. How do you kind of navigate those areas when it comes to cyber
Good
maturity?
luck getting everyone on board with that also, right? Because if you put a number scale, especially a 1 through 5, there's always going to be people who say 5, 5, 5, 5. And I understand that perspective. It's wrong, but I can understand it because, previously in a lot of these fields, I mean, even when you're going through school, right, you get grades A, B, C, D, E, and everyone wants to be an
Sure.
A, right? However, when you're talking about cybersecurity maturity, you have to take a more nuanced approach. You don't need to be the best at everything if the business does not require it. And that's usually how I emphasize that point. How much risk are you taking on by performing your regular business operations? And when I say that, examples I like to give are a bit extreme, but I like to use them nonetheless. When I work with different clients, say it's a small mom and pop shop, we'll say a donut bakery or something along those lines, right? They do not need to be the most secure organization. They don't need a full E5 license from Microsoft, for example, stuff like that. In the same token, I'm not going to go to an organization that is a multinational shop, right, and say, hey, have you heard of pfSense? I kind of think you could use that. And maybe some Wireshark analysis. No, these are tools that, while nice and free, are not necessarily going to be good for large organizations. So from that angle, I think maturity is very similar in that way. You want to first identify what level of risk you're taking on every day by performing your business operations. And ideally, you have a cybersecurity program that's just mature enough. That isn't, you're not over investing, you're not under investing, right? But you are right where the business needs you to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's flexible enough that it can go up and down with that business based upon needs. Now, that's a perfect world, right?
Right.
But the first step into getting to that really good sweet spot is helping people understand you don't have to be the best at everything, right? You just have to be the best at where you are right now, right? And try to match your current operations. And as well as I do, trying to convince people of that can be really tricky. When you've had those discussions, like how do you handle those? Yeah, exactly. Right. First, you start with a huge
You were
sigh.
going to turn this on me. No, real quick. One thing: if I am in that donut shop, and I'm like going up to the register, I'll sit there and be like, expose USB, to the customer
All the time. All the time.
Open Wi-Fi. I'm like sitting there like doing that. That's not necessarily a maturity assessment, but it's
once it's in you, it doesn't leave you.
It doesn't. If you're ever in a hospital, or healthcare is it's a challenge. Let's just put it that way. Those folks have a lot of other things to worry about.
I like that example a lot though with healthcare, because you can see, and it's prevalent in other organizations too, but especially in healthcare, I feel like you really get you can tell how invested, the hospital itself is in security pretty quickly. Because if you want to talk about organizations that, wear it all on their sleeves,
Yeah.
You'll notice real quick if there's no security, or if, you just see files everywhere, things like that, if there's a lot of unlocked doors. And I find that when you evaluate hospitals, especially, it's just a lot more prevalent when there's issues.
Yeah.
And on the same side, it's also very evident when they take things seriously as well.
Yes, agreed. And I skirted your question earlier. How do I handle that communication? I think it's like everything else. It's kind of, I like your analogy of grades, right? But think of them as like strategic grades, right?
Right.
So let's say that you're going in to become an engineer, and you get a C in public speaking.
Right.
Okay, because you had to put your efforts probably closer to calculus or physics or something like that. That makes sense, right? So you have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of resources. You don't put as much into public speaking as you do into, again, the kind of core engineering things like physics, calculus, differential equations, math and science, right? And then
Exactly.
eventually your actual core program where you actually learn about, computer engineering or engineering, I guess I should say. See, I already went to the computer thing in my head, Freudian slip. So that's kind of the conversation I lead things down. I'm like, look, yeah, you can have all of this, and here's how much it's going to cost, right?
Right.
And I think once you show the cost of something, I think that really kind of hits home with a lot of folks, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, we don't need all of that. Of course, we all would love all the bells and whistles of everything, right? Let's go buy E5 with it, with Plan 2 Defender, and this and that, like all the I'm not a Microsoft licensing guru, by the way. So some of you probably just heard me say that. I'm like, that's not a thing. But you don't need to spend that much money to actually, even be proactive and even be a little bit more mature of an organization.
There's a lot of good low hanging fruit that a lot of people overlook. My favorite is the one that comes from Microsoft a lot, MFA, right? If you just implement MFA appropriately, you've got a over 90% solution in a lot of instances from a lot of different types of attacks. So I agree with you there. You don't have to spend a lot of money, but you should spend some. And I'd say equally important as how much money you're spending is making sure that you have somebody, even if you have unloaded it on a third party, you have an MSP, you still need somebody who's in charge of thinking of cybersecurity in some capacity. You can't just pay for it and hope it goes away.
Right. And that actually leads me to one of my other questions I had for you. And this is something I know you ask about on your maturity assessments. And that's, corporate culture and how much that can affect or contribute to governance, cybersecurity maturity. I know it's a very loaded question, but let's talk about it, because it's something that's kind of always on my mind, regardless of cybersecurity really or not, is kind of the culture of an organization.
I agree.
Because it's very telling in a lot of ways, but I'll let you answer here.
Corporate culture is one of the biggest influencers of cybersecurity in a lot of different ways. And that's a broad answer. So I guess I'll break it down a little bit.
Let's break it down.
Starting at the top, if you have executives and funding representatives that are funding individuals in charge of the funding, or you have, champions, as it were, that don't really want to think of cybersecurity or don't really care, and it's a nuisance to them, then that can taint the entire company. Because if you have someone in charge of endorsing these programs, implementing these programs, supporting these programs, who just doesn't take it seriously or doesn't want to think about it, it's evident within the organization. And that can become a huge issue. If you have someone, on a lower level with just a bad attitude towards cyber, that's relatively maintained. But if you have someone at the top who just really either doesn't want to do cybersecurity, doesn't care about cybersecurity, and is in charge of running things, then you have a serious issue. Examples I'll give is the one I had earlier. Like if they think they can just get an MSP and forget about it. It's not something you can just buy, put on a shelf and say, now you're secure. It'd be nice if it were, but it's not like that. When you get an MSP, you're acknowledging that, okay, the majority of things are now offloaded. A lot of the need for me to implement, patch, monitor, respond to these things with a large team have now been are now managed for me, but I still have to be in charge of that. I still have to take it seriously. And I see the culture seep down further. You mentioned governance as well. One of the biggest indicators of a mature organization is applicable governance documents within that organization. When someone provides you their documentation and their policies, and you can tell that it's just been copy pasted, that's, oh my gosh. And it's so easy. You can just take a sentence out of the random sentence out of the policy, and you can put it into Google, and you'll see, oh yeah, they got this. This is a template from here, or this is something from there, right? Or there's key things that aren't filled out, like the actual response team and stuff like that. You can tell whether an organization's taking it seriously. You can also usually identify it pretty quickly if the POC you're in charge with responds to emails or not, or things like that, basic stuff.
Yeah.
So I would say that the culture that, as a result, influences everything from the policies to the actual program management. And if you have a bad culture, it's going to be gnarly, to say the least, when you're working with these organizations. Maybe you have a different experience, but I don't know what you've seen as well.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. You need a champion, right? And you need a champion who cares. Like, it's not.
Oh my, yeah.
I know it's, like, oh yeah, they're championing our cybersecurity efforts, and you go talk to them, and like, yeah, I mean, I'm the CFO, I got other things to do, but yeah, that's one of my jobs too,
Right.
And with that kind of laissez-faire attitude, it's it's going to trickle down. It's trickle down effect is a thing. Not necessarily with taxes, but it's
whoa.
I'm getting
have you know.
here.
No.
But it is a thing with corporate culture for sure, and just culture in general. And it only takes that one kind of broken cog to really kind of derail a true mature organization.
And you're right. It can just be one person, whether they don't want to process the payment or they just don't take it seriously. It can really gum everything up. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just how often have you just met that person who's like, oh, this really was just an approval that was needed. All you had to do was sign, but for some reason you didn't for multiple months.
Yeah.
Right.
Or we told you 1,000 times not to click on links from people you don't know.
Oh, that is okay. I've got a good story for that one. I had a client one time, and we were talking about their phishing training, right? Everyone who works anywhere at this point has probably experienced some kind of training. Don't click this, don't click that.
Whether you know it or not. And if you don't know it, guess what? You've been doing a great job.
They had one executive, one senior, and he was senior. The guy was like late 70s, early 80s. And he could not, for the life of anyone at that company, not click a phishing link. He would click them all the time. And I was helping this organization, improve. And I said, well, what do you think should be done here? You got a lot of options on the table. And they said, Frank, we've tried everything from remediation to additional education to even having the lawyer come and talk to him. He still somehow is clicking everything. And since he's so old, we're just going to wait for him to die.
Risk acceptance.
That was their plan. That was their plan. Just wait for someone to die. Sometimes the problem will take care of itself. I asked him, is he ever planning on retiring? And they said, no. He was one of the people who was like one of the early hires or helped found the company. They're like, he wants to do it till he dies. I'm like, well, okay, I believe you. And that was it, because sometimes some people just won't take it seriously. And he would sit there through the training very politely, and it reminded me a lot of, you hear of those poor grandparents who keep falling for the scammers all the time. Yeah. And I always wondered how that worked. Like, how could you consistently just keep falling for these scammers? And one of the victims said, well, one of these times it's actually going to be true, right? And it's like, what you stop and think. Sometimes some people think, well, yeah, there's scammers out there, but at one of these times there will be some prince who will need some money and will pay me back tenfold. And that was the part where I was like, okay, this is a new mindset I had not considered before.
Talk about culture.
Yes, talk about that. This is like
90s.
almost generationally different culture, right?
Yeah.
Like if I fill out enough of those postcards in the 90s, sooner or later, right, I will have Publishers Clearinghouse show up and bring me a check. So
Absolutely.
they're like taking that same mentality. Sooner or later, one of these people is going to hit. And it was a completely different perspective that I had to integrate in how I approach some of these things. Because you will have some people who are like, yes, scammers are out there. Yes, I keep getting scammed. But one day, it won't be a scammer. And everyone will eat their words.
That's right. I'll prove it to everybody.
I'll prove it to the world.
One day I will actually be paying my tolls, my unpaid tolls.
Exactly.
From an SMS message. Oh man, you know what though? I can somewhat identify with that because us growing up with the internet, I got, I think I got scammed a couple times. After a couple times, I was like, all right, no, none of this is true. But it
was Columbia with their CD offers and all that. 13 CDs for a penny that would come after us, right?
Yeah,
and I know a
penny
few
for the
friends.
first couple, and then they just kept jacking up the prices. But I think I purchased a laptop one time when I was a kid because I saved up my money. I was like $200 or something like that off eBay, and the guy just never sent it.
Oh,
and I think after that, I was like, this is a pretty good deal for this laptop. I think after that, I was like, anything like that.
I got to tell you, I love eBay, but I'm so still leery about a lot of eBay.
It's gotten better.
It has gotten better. It has gotten better. Now, I actually think I might trust most of it more than Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah.
Facebook Marketplace, you want to talk about the sketch zone. And those, you'll meet them in person, and you probably shouldn't. They will take something from you or not give you what you want.
Even trying to sell something on Facebook Marketplace, you get so many scammers who are like, what do they try? It's like the swap technique where they're like, oh, I'm gonna have my I'm gonna have my secretary send you a check for twice the amount because there's some kind of a reason why they have to send it twice the amount, and then you just go ahead and Venmo me the second half once you cash the check. And it's like a bum check, right? And so the idea is that you get to you send them the cash from your account before the check clears, and then the check's never going to clear, right?
Dustin, I had someone from Facebook Marketplace. I sold a table to them, and then a week later, they came back and said, "I don't want it anymore. I need a refund." And it was a cheap table. It was only like $50, and it was a big, nice table. Yeah, I was like, I mean, do you just want to keep it? I don't want it in my garage. And they're like, no.
What was wrong with this table?
Nothing was wrong with it. It was a completely fine table, and I was just like, "Fine, here's $50."
Was it possessed by the devil? Was it one of those things where it was like a latent
It was my old table. No, I hope not. That would be terrible. It is not like some long legs thing or something along those lines.
It starts moving around. Okay, we don't need this in our house.
So frustrating, to be perfectly honest. I just couldn't. And then, actually, who knows? Maybe because that was the table that then, when I tried to repurpose it into a coffee table, I drilled right through my finger. So who knows?
It was a cursed table.
It was.
That's what happened. That family went under, had really hard times when they bought that.
Yep.
You sold them a cursed table. We didn't know about the curse, Frank.
Yeah, we and you know what? Neither did I. And this is just how I live, I guess.
Yeah.
Like this.
You're like, I thought this was just life. I didn't know that there was a table to get rid of and it would all go away. So at the beginning of this, we kind of I mentioned that cyber maturity was in the zeitgeist again, and I mean it kind of always has been. But one of the things that recently happened was there was the Justice Department sued an entity for false claiming that its NIST, I think 800-171 or maybe it was 853 score. They claimed they had 70 to 80% implemented, and they actually only had about 22% implemented of the framework or of the standard, which is bad.
What's the word I'm looking for? It's bad. Yes.
It's one thing to fudge numbers on a SOC 2 report, and I'm not saying that you should do it or it's okay. It's not, and you shouldn't.
Right.
But it's another thing to fudge numbers when you're reporting to the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the Department of DHS, any department.
If I recall, you sent me the article and I looked at it. If I recall correctly, that there was no federal agency that found it out. It still depended upon a whistleblower.
It was a whistleblower.
Actually, they're not.
Yeah.
And, that's a whole other topic, right? A whole other
Yeah.
can of
We could
worms
get into
of,
that.
the
That's
finding
the
out if
world of
people are
politics.
lying.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, anyway, sorry, continue. I
No,
interrupted you.
no. So, on, with that kind of thing in mind, it seems like maturity's, because of this, now that it's like when, who was the CIO who recently got arrested because they lied to the FBI about, was it Uber's CISO?
Really? I might have missed it. No, I know that they got in trouble.
No,
Did he get arrested too?
I think somebody went to jail.
Oh,
Or
well,
maybe they just got
don't
fined.
lie to
I
the
don't
FBI.
know. We should probably research these things before we talk about them. But
Let's just make it up.
so when
One's
things
looking up anyway.
we'll post this one in the show notes.
Yeah.
But the link to this article. But when you have something like this that now has precedence in a legal manner, and now is something that it's like, you guys better actually be doing the things you say you're doing.
Right.
Because look, at the end of the day, those are for people who are providing services for the federal government. So those services can be as benign as landscaping services, or can be as intricate as the launch codes, right?
Yep.
So you should probably do the things, and I don't know if they've finally kind of set the stage for NIST 801 for CMMC. If they've said, okay, everybody's got to do it, and you got to do it now.
It's now out of draft, I know, and it's set up. But the whole CMMC drama has been more extended and torrid than a daytime soap opera. And it is everything from the old gatekeepers that tried to establish it to aggrandize or profit, to the, I think, what was it? Carrie Lake was involved at some point too. And there was this whole back and forth. It has become such, almost even over politicized, and from my perspective, poorly run from the start. And I know, thankfully, it's now out of draft, but as far as its applicability and the requirement to actually adhere to it for all the DIB members, we've got more than one person we could bring on the show for that.
I was about to say, this is like a whole
show of the nightmare. That is
Yeah.
CMMC. Yeah.
So with that, I feel like a lot of our KPIs, key performance indicators, metrics that we have within cybersecurity, don't get me wrong, they're important, and they're nice to have, and they're
Right.
even more than that, I'd say. But this is something that's not just nice to have. This is something that's like a requirement. It's a regulation, right? It's a regulatory body is going to tell you have to do this. Our ISACA and AICPA friends will know that Sarbanes-Oxley, GLBA,
Yep.
our European folks will know GDPR. Like, those are requirements of things that you have to do.
And
if
why,
you don't,
when
you will get fined or sued or shut down or go to jail.
Why, when the requirements become law, are they so vague, Dustin? They're so open. I get it. If you're going to make it applicable to everyone, there has to be a level of flexibility. But some of these are overly vague and are so widely open to interpretation. And part of me thinks that's on purpose, because saying you're in violation, example, when you're in violation with GDPR, it is a lot of legwork to prove it. And you've got to go through, you want to talk about European courts, about courts in general being, mazes. European courts are big mazes. And then when you're at the EU level, good luck, right? So it's very frustrating that they're so vaguely written. If there's one request I would have, if there was a wish I had in this realm, it's that I like that we're having laws established. They should be clearer and easier to interpret, in my opinion.
They're very non-prescriptive, and there is a reason behind that. I think one of the reasons is that they're written by lawyers and not by cybersecurity professionals.
You're right, or politicians.
I'm sure there's people on there who are consulted, I'm guessing. But you've actually been an expert witness in situations.
Yes.
So you've had to deal with kind of the court system and the interpretation of certain laws, and what a company did or said they were doing versus what actually happened, and how data was leaked or how data was stolen, or whatever it was. So you've had firsthand experience with that kind of not headbutting, but that that cross field interaction between law and cybersecurity.
Yeah, and you can say headbutting too. It is a lot of headbutting.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, no, and this is something that, even on the pen test side, we deal with on a daily basis where, someone's using old ciphers or, out of date end of life ciphers. And we're like, hey, this isn't recommended. And they're like, yeah, but what, who cares? It's still encrypted. It's like, but it can be broken,
Yeah, exactly. It can. And to getting to your earlier point too about culture and caring, I like that you brought up lawyers there, because one of the most effective individuals in cybersecurity can be a lawyer who understands cyber.
Yes.
Right. So we're talking about these things, these policies that are written, these laws that are written that are specific to cybersecurity and for companies. Having a functional, you don't even have to have a good one, but a functional lawyer who functionally understands cybersecurity and cares or is paid enough to care, right, is one of the most effective team members when you're actually establishing an overall strategy and plan. And it can be as specific as when you're doing your information classification policy, right, for your data loss prevention, your DLP, or even when you're writing your employee handbook, right, having that legal representative there who understands. You want to talk about someone who can really influence culture and as a result, the success of a cyber program. It is a functional lawyer who functionally understands cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. It always reminds me of the scene in Parks and Rec where Leslie's trying to apologize to Andy, and the lawyer's there, and he's like, "Can't say sorry, can't say apologize, can't say incident." It does feel like that redlining going back and forth with general counsel or legal counsel sometimes, but they're just trying to protect it. Like, this language can be interpreted in this way, and this way. So you have to use this language instead, which is a really interesting, thing that I think you and I have both had to go through in very recent days, to help build out policy for folks and just to help build out, cybersecurity functions within an organization, like making sure that you're saying, and then again, those policies that go to end users, and they have to sign those, has to be very clear and concise language, and what you are allowed to do on the network versus what you're not allowed to do on the network. And there's some pretty blanket and, boilerplate stuff that goes in there, but then there's some really specific things depending on what vertical you're working in, right? If you're working in energy, it's going to look completely different than if you're working in food services.
I agree.
Like the donut shop.
To bring it all full circle there. Yeah.
It's all full circle, like a donut.
Well, I mean, it does. We kind of have touched on all the different parts of the topic in different ways, because if you want to be a mature organization and you want to appropriately handle a lot of these things, you want to make sure, if you find you have the right sized perspective, right? Whether you need to spend a ton or a little. Also, you want to understand your risk. You want to understand if there are compliance frameworks you need to adhere to, or whether there's ones that can help you guide implementation overall. And you also have to make sure that the culture is appropriate for it as well, and that the people who are making it up. Because without these components, and we're getting to the point where how you and I perform assessments with that answer, where you have to have the right people, you have to have the right process, you have to have the right tech, and then you have to have the right governance there. These are the components that, if you appropriately apply them to your organization, you can have a mature cyber stance. I've seen a few of them, and I do this all day. So when I say I've seen a few of them, we still have a lot of work to do, because they are few and far between. But every now and then one pops up that really kind of shows how well it can be done. Yeah,
totally agree. And that's, kind of a final closeout here is like, are there limitations to cyber maturity, and what are the limitations to, like, so you go through a cyber maturity assessment, right? What aren't we measuring? What aren't we looking at? What is there anything else that, like, someone just applies cyber maturity, some kind of a cyber maturity model, and says, okay, well, we're 4s here, 3s here, 5s here, like, we're good to go. Well, there are limitations, right? It's not a silver bullet for, I think, what we would call now cyber resiliency, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is because cybersecurity by its nature is, and I've put a lot of thought to this, and you and I try very hard to be proactive in cyber, right?
Mm-hmm.
It matters, but there will never be a silver bullet because there's always going to be a reactive element to it, right? There's always going to be some new hack, some new vulnerability, something's going to crop up and someone's going to take advantage of it. And then we're going to have to react to it. There's no, golden dome, as it were, right? Or a special ticket you can use or special tool that will just make you completely secure. I remember a lot back to General Alexander, who was the director of NSA when I worked there. He would always say, "Oh, everyone says the safest, computer is the one not connected to the internet. I would say the safest computer is the one that's not connected, turned off, and still in the box." And I think that's a good point. But then you have no cyber, so you have no internet, you have no computer, right? So it's always going to be dangerous, and it's always going to be reactive, at least on a certain level.
Right. It's anything in business, right? There is no silver
price you pay for doing business.
Right. If there was a silver bullet for all things business, then guess what? We'd have everybody be a billionaire. That'd be great. Yep. I'll be happy.
Oh no, there'd be someone who's not happy. The first billionaire would be happy because they don't want everyone to be a billionaire.
That's right. That's right. But you need it needs the same level of care that I think the rest of business usually gets, right? And I don't necessarily see that because I think it is something that's so new. We talked about innovation with Micah last week, or 2 weeks ago, or whenever it was, whenever we released that
last week. It was fun. It was a good time.
Yeah. And one of the things that we brought up was this, how fast innovation moves, and then how organizations and people can't necessarily keep up with the way that things are changing, and they're changing even exponentially, even faster now. Look, we talked about AI ad nauseum this week. I'm just going to mention it here real quick. Where 3 years ago we didn't have the capabilities that we have today, right? What's going to come out next where we didn't have it 2 months ago, and now we have it, and now it's just completely infiltrated the market. Blockchain did this too. It was a huge disruptor, and in a good way. For the most part, there's some bad things that it's been used for too. But as disruptors are, they're both good and bad things. And same thing with AI. There's both good and bad things about AI.
I agree.
And so, with that idea of change, cybersecurity or information security has been around for a long time, right? Cybersecurity has been around for pretty long time, not quite as long as information security because it just wasn't. You talk to some of the old timers like yourself and myself. It was called network security back in the day.
I don't want to be old timer yet. I'm not ready to be old timer.
Oh, too late. Too bad, buddy.
I know. I'm looking I'm literally looking at this as we're doing it, and I'm seeing these gray hairs, and it's
Welcome to aging in cyberspace. Totally different. We're like dogs. It's like times 7, our age times 7.
Oh, so, yep, 100%.
Yep. So welcome. Anyway, because of that, it's harder to kind of obviously turn the ship and to get things going, right? But cybersecurity is still one of those things. It seems like even with AI, we've spun up some chief AI officers pretty quickly in some organizations.
Yeah, and all the great qualifications they pretend to have. It's awesome.
Been working with AI for 50 years, leading
absolutely. Prompt developer. I've been developing prompt for 15 years. Oh, how so? Well, I think thoughts.
Yeah, think thoughts. Of course, and we all do. But no, so, it does seem like if I've seen this happen if they make cybersecurity sexier, it gets more attention. So we've talked about this in a previous podcast, Spectre and Meltdown had icons and
just like people, by the way. Just side note there.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
Not just cyber or AI. You make people look better. They get more attention also. But please continue.
Very true. And so it is almost like the job of cybersecurity people to I always like to say spread a little bit of FUD, right? Like fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Right.
A little bit, because sometimes you got to scare people because they're not getting it. It's like, no. If this thing goes down, we will lose $10 million an hour. And that's not being hyperbolic. That's a conversation we've had with some of our clients, right?
Like you make $10 million an hour.
Yeah.
If this happens, you won't be able to do business. Ergo.
Yeah, exactly. This will cost you this much money, right?
Yeah.
And so, that doesn't make it, I guess that does kind of make it sexy, but more scary.
No, now you're talking sexy scary. That's the best one.
Yeah, and that's a different
type of scary.
That's Frank and mine. That's
our separate podcast.
Late night. Legitimate cyber.
Late night cyber.
Late night cyber. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, so it's really, I know it's a difficult thing to do, and there's so many things going on in the world, let alone the cyber world where you want to talk about getting attacks every day. We all are all the time. We're constantly being scanned and probed and everything. All of our assets all the time, are just constantly under a barrage of maybe not attacks, but recon. some form 100%. Of recon is happening, right? So could be an attack. And so, it is such a difficult problem. Having the level of cyber maturity that your organization requires, though, does help with this. I think it helps most of our clients sleep better. It certainly relieves some of the stress.
I agree.
And
it can protect people too, like their jobs, especially like if you're a leader in cybersecurity. I once was I was at a convention and did a talk to a bunch of CIOs and CISOs. And I said, raise your hand if you realize you're probably the first person to get fired during an incident. And they're like, yep. I was like, what if I told you there was a way to prevent that through really good documentation and finding your lawyer?
Let's find it. Because look, breaches are going to happen. You can be the most resilient organization on the planet. Breaches will happen. I mean, it just is a thing. Incidents will happen. Events will happen. It's a thing. It's how you handle it that really is going to make or break something. So yeah, I think with that, we great discussion today. Look, cyber maturity is vast. It's bigger than what we talked about today, obviously. But really appreciate everybody, listening in and listening to Frank and I ramble about it for the last 45 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, hey, let me try this one too.
Yeah.
Like and subscribe. I'm doing a little bit of data analysis, seeing if I say that, does it really work? Pretty soon we may have 12 subscribers.
And that's where the real YouTube money starts coming in.
That's when it starts pouring buckets, Dustin, buckets.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining. And we'll see you next time on Legitimate Cyber.
Thanks.